Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. This was Lin Li's most powerful weapon yet, one of the 7 crossbows of the Stars of Fury. Legend had it that it could destroy stars using holy light with one gentle blow. It was precisely because of this holy light that Lin Li dared to enter Sire Town, where undead creatures roamed freely, and go against the legendary level Lich and humorous Wyrm. Nobody knew the extent of power of the holy light better than legendary level. Even the most powerful undead creatures would be reduced to ashes with one blow from this tiny crossbow. Of course, provided Lin Li was capable of maneuvering it. The debris of the 7 stars held the purest of elemental powers: earth, water, fire, wind, light, dark, and chaos. Once these 7 elemental powers exploded all at once, they were powerful enough to destroy the world, so how could one man maneuver such terrifying powers easily? Even Lin Li would have to resort to such a stupid plan if he had not had the Stars of Fury on hand. The only advantage he had was that he might be able to control it. This was a really stupid plan indeed. Channeling mana continuously to strike the debris so that the elemental powers within would be released once the mana accumulated to a critical point. Even the lowest of mage apprentices knew of this method, and it could be used with virtually any magical equipment. Theoretically speaking, the power of any magical equipment could be released as long as there was sufficient mana. Of course, this was only feasible theoretically. How many people in Amril had such Herculean mana? Even ordinary magical equipment would deplete a magic shooter's mana, much less the debris of the stars. It would probably require an astronomical amount of mana to power even the tiniest portion thereof, and most mages would never dare dream of doing it before reaching the legendary realm. This was akin to forcefully replacing the strength of the Stars of Fury with immortals, and even someone with nearly unlimited mana like Lin Li was not confident in succeeding. The only thing he could do now was to try his best to channel all the mana he could into the debris of the stars and leave the rest to luck. This was a last gamble of sorts, which Lin Li detested the most, as he was the type to favor plans with a dozen alternative routes where he could slowly narrow down his choices. Unfortunately, the Lich did not give him the chance to choose. Lin Li could only surrender and die a certain death by the dragon breath, or he could risk it all and either side would perish. As more mana was channeled into the debris of the stars, it started emitting a strong holy scent. It was unusually strong, but not suffocating at all. Instead, it gave the adventurers a sensation like that of a gentle breeze caressing their face. At the same time, the debris of the stars grew brighter and brighter, looking like a shining star in the night sky at first and finally lighting up the entire sky like a rising sun. As the holy light grew brighter and brighter, more and more sweat dripped down from Lin Li's forehead. His panting became heavier, making him sound like a tired bull. Perhaps only Lin Li knew how much mana he had channeled into debris of the stars in the past 2 minutes. It was truly an astronomical figure. In terms of magic, it would translate into over 100 pyroblasts. To top it all off, he did not use any techniques while doing it, only maintaining it at a mind-numbing speed. It was basically suicidal. If not for Lin Li's gargantuan source of mana as well as his Herculean mental strength to replenish the loss, he would have been a corpse a long time ago. But even then, Lin Li was finding it hard to continue. The continued process was as horrifying as if somebody decided to slice open their arteries to allow the blood to gush out like a flood. The huge loss of mana made Lin Li weak, and the symptoms began to show on him. His consciousness became blurry, and he could not see in front of him clearly. The world seemed to have turned into black and white as a ringing sound persisted in his ears, while colored spots seemed to be dancing in front of his eyes. Lin Li had lost his ability to generate basic thoughts now, as his mind was a blank page save for a trace of consciousness. Keep pushing, fill up this never-ending black hole, called the debris of the stars, before my mana runs out. As Lin Li felt the holy scent coming from the debris of the stars become stronger, Lin Li knew he was not far away from success. Perhaps all it would take was a last spur of mana before the divine power within it would be released. Just a little more. As the holy light lit up the sky, Lin Li's mana was on the brink of depletion as he held on with the last trace of his consciousness and proceeded to wring his mental strength almost in a suicidal manner. This was the only way he could squeeze out the last of his mana. The pain it brought was far more than an average person could withstand. It felt as though there was a nail in his brain, stirring up his insides. If Jason and the rest could fly in the sky with the levitation spell, they would clearly see that the seemingly peaceful mage was suffering much torture as his face had already turned pale under his cloak. Sweat was dripping off him, and his fists were clenched so tightly that his nails had sunk into skin and drew blood that was now flowing off his palms. Time seemed to go by even more slowly in the midst of immense torture. Lin Li felt like he was walking along a never-ending path and could neither struggle nor surrender. The only thing he could do was to grit his teeth and press on, using all his strength to channel the last of his mana into the debris of the stars. The sky lit up. The terrified adventurers could clearly see a ray of light spreading throughout the sky. It looked like a shooting star, and at the same time resembled a rising sun. In the pitch-black darkness of the night sky, the ray of light seemed even more blinding. There was no surging magical wave, nor any earth-shattering explosion. Everything happened in silence as though someone had secretly lit up a lamp in the dark. However, this lamp was akin to the clock on Doomsday for the world of the undead. The humorous WYRM let out a whimper the moment the sky lit up as it wrapped itself up in its wings. Its huge body trembled in the sky, looking like prey in front of a predator. At that moment, the powerful wings of the humorous WYRM seemed very weak as it was unable to defend itself from the spreading light at all. The bone wings melted in a flash like snow in the sun. No. Not just the wings. As the light continued becoming brighter, the entire body of the humorous WYRM seemed to burn like a candle as it melted quickly. Should one look from afar, they might not even recognize that this rapidly melting pile of mass was the powerful humorous WYRM from before. The only proof of its existence now was the pathetic whimpers coming from it. WWW. What the heck is this? Jason pulled at his hair as the sight before him was driving him nearly mad. He was seeing things for sure. The humorous WYRM was melting. I'm not seeing things, right? Sienna was staring with wide eyes as well, and was even stuttering too. In order to ascertain that he was not dreaming, he pinched himself harshly, only for the intense pain to pull him back to the scary reality. Right, the humorous WYRM was indeed melting. My God, the two groaned at the same time. The two adventurers on the brink of collapse stood there frozen as they stared at each other for a good minute before Jason carefully said, "That fellow, he killed a humorous WYRM?" "I guess," Sienna gulped as his eyes remained fixed on the sky. "I guess so." The two of them watched as the humorous WYRM melted before their eyes and disappeared in a green puff of smoke, leaving only a huge dragon crystal which shone with a bright red light in its place. "Bloody hell, what the heck is that?" Sienna exclaimed suddenly just as the two of them thought the whole ordeal was over. "What?" Jason paused before he followed Sienna's gaze and saw a crack in the sky. It began with small cracks, but as the light became brighter, the cracks enlarged as well. Finally, it resembled an endless ditch. The sky looked like a shattered mirror now as it broke into countless pieces all of a sudden. Then, a loud booming sound was heard. The whole world vanished. Jason furiously rubbed his eyes. Right. The world had disappeared indeed. The skeletal warriors that covered the landscape earlier, as well as the ghastly white bones and corpses that littered the ground, all seemed to vanish without a trace. There was no blinding light in the sky, and there was no endless ditch. There was only an empty room and a trembling skeleton. Everyone stood in the room with a blank expression as they were still deep in shock due to what had just happened. It was the most mind-blowing experience of their whole lives. Could a human really cause a humorous WYRM to melt? Was this a joke? Well, even if they did tell someone about it as a joke, they would probably be laughed at for being childish. But this was the truth. The young mage named Felik had melted a humorous WYRM just like that, and it all happened right in front of their eyes. They even remembered all the details clearly. From the melting of the first bone to the humorous WYRM disappearing into a green puff of smoke, it was all too real to be a dream. And amongst the 20-odd people in the room, Jason was the most overwhelmed. As one of the best adventurers in Duland, He had seen and heard more than the average person, and while he could not decipher what that light from before was, he knew how terrifying the power of a humorous WYRM was. Right, and the world covered in corpses, he was sure that it was the legendary magical domain. Jason felt a chill run down his back at the thought of the word magical domain. Think about it. That bit of light had killed the humorous WYRM and tore through the magical domain of a legendary mage. What kind of strength was that? That was no strength a mortal should possess. Jason did not dare imagine what kind of monster could hold such strength. Perhaps this monster would shake up the whole of Duland, and even Breezy Plains, soon. He would have to report this to the Adventurers Guild when he returned. This fellow was much too dangerous. Jason even thought that he was probably more so than the nightmare of the Breezy Plains, the Ashen Warlock. While the Ashen Warlock held devastating power, he lived a solitary life and disliked contact with people. As long as nobody was dumb enough to trifle with him, they would not have to worry about his existence. The fellow in front of Jason, however, looked nothing like a solitary man. Right, this fellow had mentioned something about Breezy Plains Guild of Magic. Jason had thought nothing of his words at first, but after the humorous WYRM was melted and the magical domain torn open, Jason felt like something was not quite right as he repeated it in his mind. His expression suddenly changed. My God, don't tell me that the Supreme Council has finally decided to extend their influence to the Breezy Plains? No way, I have to report this to the Adventurers Guild soon. Jason could not keep a calm expression as he thought of the scary tales from the Dark Ages. At this moment, however, Sienna was silently rejoicing at the side. He could not believe that he was still alive. One had to know that he was nowhere near friendly towards this young mage, and even though he looked respectful at times, he was always thinking of something else. Given the intelligence of this young mage, there was no way he could not tell, which was why he had suddenly turned against Jason and him just before entering the bell tower. Sienna could not help breaking into sweat at the thought of it. He had already drawn his machete, waiting for Weather to grab this guy before he sliced through him. Fortunately, Weather had been too weak, and was hit by magic before he could even retrieve his daggers. Otherwise, Sienna would have been dead by now if he had really slashed at Lin Li with his machete. Sienna mopped the sweat on his forehead as he silently celebrated. The over 20 adventurers were still deeply in shock, while Jason and Sienna were both lost in thought. At that moment, the atmosphere in the room seemed unusually strange as everything seemed to come to a standstill save for the trembling skeleton. Right, where is Mage Felix? The strange silence was broken by Jason after some time. After his inquiry, everybody suddenly realized that the person who had single-handedly killed the humorous WYRM and saved them all was lying in a heap on the floor, with Norfeller standing guard by him. Oh no! Jason and Sienna were dumbfounded as they quickly gathered around him. Lin Li's face was pale and his breathing was weak. If not for the faint heartbeat, everybody would have thought he was dead. The scariest thing was that neither Jason nor Sienna could detect any magical wave from him. It was like the person lying on the floor was no more than a weak man instead of a powerful mage. What do we do? Panic was evident on Sienna's face. They had met a humorous WYRM. Who knew what other scary creatures could be hidden in Sire Town? It would not be an issue if Mage Felix was around, but should anything happen to him, it would be difficult for Sienna and his men to return to Roland City alive. While Jason said nothing, he was no less strung up than Sienna. Of course, he was not worried about whether he could return alive. In fact, he was worried about the legendary Supreme Council's reaction should anything happen to this young mage. There shouldn't be a problem. Mage Felix has overdrawn his mana while using magic previously. Rosha's voice was weak, but her words set Jason and Sienna at ease immediately. That's great, that's great. Time went by. Nobody knew how long later it was before they heard a faint whimper as the sky was just turning bright. Master, you're awake. Norfeller was the first to realize that Lin Li had awoken, and a rare expression of happiness appeared on the high-ranking vampire's face. Wonderful, Mage Felix, you're finally awake. How do you feel? Jason and Sienna quickly gathered around him again as they, too, sported expressions of happiness. Well, terrible, Lin Li rubbed his temples as he frowned deeply. It was a terrible feeling. He had never exhausted his mana so thoroughly ever since his coming to Amril. He even had to tear at his mental strength to squeeze out the last of his mana, and after it had been released, Lin Li felt empty, like everything in him had been sucked away. Lin Li had never understood why Anduin placed much importance on how he used every ounce of his mana, nor had he understood why all the other mages were so passionate about techniques to conserve the use of mana until today. Only after he experienced the feeling of truly exhausting his mana did he understand how pathetic a mage who had lost all his mana was. It was like turning from a god to a helpless mortal, like he had just died once. But this should only be temporary. After all, it was just the usual exhaustion of mana that every mage would encounter. It was only because Lin Li's mana was somewhat different that he had not encountered this before. Now that he had, he was finding it hard to adjust to it, but given his mental strength, he should be able to make a complete recovery soon. Truth was, as Norfeller was helping him up, Lin Li could already feel that his mana was slowly coming back. In fact, the speed of recovery was much faster than usual. It felt as though he had broken past another bottleneck, and now that he had, more and more water was gushing out of it at once. Lin Li thought it was a misconception at first, but soon he realized that it was not the case. His mana was indeed recovering at a much faster speed than he expected, probably boasting more than 30% increase in speed. It was too huge an increase for Lin Li to think it false. What's going on? Lin Li's brain was muddled. He knew that, based on his mental strength, the usual speed at which his mana recovered was already shockingly fast, but to think that such a strange thing would happen after exhausting his mana this time round. It seemed like he would have to discuss this with Anduin sometime soon after they returned. While his mana was recovering at a frightful speed, the effects of depleting his mana were still lingering. Truthfully, Lin Li felt his head throbbing ever since he had woken up. It was like somebody had knocked him out with a hammer, and there was a constant buzzing sound in his ear that resulted in him having to tilt his ear toward the person speaking in order to try and hear them. This made Lin Li look at Jason and Sienna with some suspicion. The two of you didn't beat me up while I was unconscious, right? No, no, no. This question almost scared the two of them out of their wits as they denied repeatedly while shaking their heads, their faces turning pale. Is this a joke? No matter how brave we are, we would never do such a thing. Isn't it just like suicide? It was just a joke, don't be so nervous. Lin Li had never thought that his joke would scare the two of them so much, and could not help feeling awkward all of a sudden. Fortunately, he was a shameless guy, so after laughing at it, he quickly changed the topic. Right, where's the old lich? Only after asking did Lich realize that there was only a trembling skeleton besides the adventurers in this empty room, while the Lich that had summoned the humorous WYRM was nowhere to be seen. What's going on? Lin Li's expression was frozen, though he'd already known that the Lich would be heavily wounded after the humorous domain was destroyed by the debris of the stars. He might even be ousted from the legendary realm after the injury. However, Lin Li had never thought that the debris of the stars would cause such damage that a lich who had reached the legendary realm would vanish. That's not right, it can't be. Soon, however, Lin Li refuted this assumption. While the debris of the stars held the power to destroy all undead creatures, it was only when all its power had been released. Lin Li had only used a small portion of its power, a very small portion, in fact. It would suffice to kill the humorous WYRM as well as destroy the humorous domain, but it was too ridiculous to say that it could also turn a lich into ashes, unless... A trace of suspicion appeared in Lin Li's mind. When he glanced at the skeleton again, there was a hint of a smile on his face. Seems like he has really died. What a pity, I had a few questions for him. Never mind, then. Sienna, go get a few people to tie up this skeleton. We'll bring it back to Roland City. I heard there are some priests in Roland City who have ways to deal with undead creatures. Perhaps we can ask them for help and see if we can find out some secrets from its soul fire. All right, Mage Felix. Sienna nodded and called a few of his men. What the young mage said was true indeed. Roland City was near the borders of the Felon Kingdom, and thus right next to the Holy Kingdom that was Leaden. Many priests, who took it upon themselves to spread the gospel, chose Roland City as their first stop. Hence, in this border city, one could find the grandest church as well as the highest number of people doing holy work in the whole of the Felon Kingdom. As for the rest, Lin Li's gaze swept around the room. Look around and see where the young master is hidden. Yes. Hang on, the trembling skeleton suddenly asked for mercy at this time. Mr. Mage, you can't do this to me. Bloody hell, the skeleton was talking. Everyone jumped in shock, and the adventurers holding the rope even retreated a few steps. This was blasphemy. A skeleton was the lowest of undead creatures, so how could it speak the language of humans? Only the highest-ranked undead creatures like vampires and liches could do so. Even the humorous Wyrm, which was the strongest of all undead creatures, could not do it, much less a skeleton. Haha, Lin Li calmly smiled. He was the only one who was not shocked by it. It was as though he had already guessed that it would happen. When he looked at the skeleton again, he looked directly at the flickering light in its eyes. And why can't I do that, Mr. Lich? My God, everyone inhaled at Lin Li's words as they all had the same expression of disbelief. How could this be? This frail skeleton was the Lich who'd created the humorous domain and summoned the humorous Wyrm. When they thought back on how they had let their guard down and spent a few hours with the Lich, they could not help but feel their skin crawl. If he had done something earlier, they would probably have died a long time ago. Why's that, Mr. Lich? Don't you want to say something? Lin Li smiled as he stared at the skeleton as a bit of silver light danced on his fingertips. It was a remnant of the power from the debris of the stars. It was only a tiny bit, but the divine power of the debris of the stars was so powerful that even the tiniest amount would be enough to turn any undead creature below level 18 into ashes. Alright, since you're not willing to say anything, I'll help you do it, Lin Li started without waiting for the Lich to reply. You're surely upset about the humorous domain being torn apart. If I'm not wrong, you've fallen from the legendary realm, right? Or the divine power had hurt your soul fire and caused you to become very weak, so while you have knowledge of the legendary realm now, your strength is beneath that of a Lich, otherwise, you wouldn't have turned into a skeleton to fool us. The skeleton stood dumbly as the light in the hollows of its eyes flickered. Lin Li gave it a glance, before carrying on. But you seem to have forgotten something important. You're of high status, and a Lich of legendary strength. The aura you give off does not have the stench of decay that undead creatures possess. That's it? The light in the skeleton's eyes withdrew, suddenly. It could not believe that that was the reason for its ploy's failure, the lack of a decaying stench. Yeep, that's it, haha, aren't you regretting it now, Mr. Lich? Given your power, even if you have fallen from the legendary realm and hurt your soul fire, you would still be around level 15, am I right? If you had been bold enough and took a chance to fight it out with Jason and the rest, perhaps you would have gotten away before I woke up. Alright, I've said all there was to say. Now, let me ask you a few questions. I hope you can answer me truthfully. Lin Li smiled kindly, but the silver flame on his fingertips danced lightly. The sheer divine power emitting from it caused the skeleton to take a few steps back. Right, before I ask you these questions, I have to remind you of something. I'm up for discussion of any kind, but I hate it when people lie, so I'll advise you to keep any funny ideas to yourself, lest I cause you a lifetime of regret by being too heavy-handed. I understand. The skeleton eyed the silver flame carefully. The holy scent it gave off was lethal to him, and even the once legendary Lich could not help being in fear, standing before the silver flame. First, your name. You. Ujvalusi. My God, Sienna could not contain his surprise when the skeleton uttered his name. You're Ujvalusi? What is it, Sienna? Nothing. Sienna only realized that what he had done was slightly inappropriate after Lin Li questioned him, and hurried to explain himself while shaking his head. I just didn't think that he would be Ujvalusi. Why, is Ujvalusi a well-known name? Pretty much. Oh? Lin Li's interest was piqued after hearing this. Do tell. Well, you see, Mage Felix, Sienna gulped, before his words began flowing. Legend had it that 400 years ago, the castellan of Roland City had a head mage called Uchfalusi, who was only 36 years old, but was already at level 18. He was the closest to the legendary realm in the whole of the Breezy Plains, and his presence gave Roland City an important status in the Breezy Plains. He served the castellan mansion for 10 years, and had astounding achievements. The most well-known of those was the story of how he had single-handedly wiped out the 3 largest bandit organizations. Everyone thought that he would surely surpass the legendary realm before the age of 50. Only, who would have known that an illness would turn it all to naught? The second year after he had wiped out the bandits, the head mage fell heavily ill, and although the castellan had called all the doctors he could, and even asked the Pharmacists' Guild for help, he could not stop death from taking what it's due. Thus, Uchfalusi met the end of his life and died in his own bed that winter. Uchfalusi's death left a deep regret in the hearts of the people in Roland City, and people remembered him dearly even after 400 years. They had always thought that Roland City would have a true legendary mage as their guardian if not for his illness. Sienna had thought so too, only, he'd never expected to meet him personally in Sire Town after 400 years. To think that Uchfalusi would turn into an undead creature after 400 years. Not bad, Mr. Uchfalusi, very interesting life you had, Lin Li only smiled after hearing the story. Seems like the illness not only brought you death. Yes, the skeleton's voice was throaty. It did not even have the strength to lie in front of the silver flame. Don't be so nervous, Mr. Uchfalusi. I have no interest in what happened 400 years ago. The only thing I wish to know now is this: where have you hidden the young master of the castellan's family? Right below the bell tower, in the basement. Very well, Lin Li nodded his head with satisfaction after finding out the young master's whereabouts, and turned to Sienna. Sienna, get a few people to go to the basement with you and save Miss Yvonne's brother. Alright, Mage Felix. After watching Sienna and his men leave, Lin Li's gaze fell upon Uchfalusi once again. As for you, Lin Li did not hesitate for long, as Uchfalusi's presence itself was a tricky problem. He was a true lich. While he had fallen from the legendary realm, his knowledge of it remained. Even though Lin Li had mentioned bringing him back to Roland City, he was only trying to scare Uchfalusi since he would never dare do that. Uchfalusi might surrender without a fight, but Lin Li still would not dare do that, as he could not guarantee that they could bear the consequences if anything happened. Thankfully, Lin Li had always been straightforward with such matters. If he was unable to control it, he might as well destroy it. As for you, Mr. Uchfalusi, Lin Li drawled as he brought the silver flame in front of Uchfalusi. In a flash, a blinding light filled the room, and the holy scent became almost tangible as it loomed there. Almost everyone felt pressure like nothing before, especially Uchfalusi, who was an undead creature. He let out a terrible screech. No. No. You can't do this to me. I can't die yet, there's so many things I have yet to do. Why can't I do that to you? Seeing as the silver flame was slowly approaching him, Uchfalusi trembled. The fear he felt now was unlike the one he'd pretended to be in earlier. His senses of an undead creature told him that the divine power in this bit of silver flame was definitely enough to cause him to perish instantaneously, and that knowledge made him collapse mentally under the immense fear he felt. Don't kill me, as long as you'll let me go. I swear on my soul fire that I won't hurt you at all. I'll even become your servant. Oh? The silver flame that was almost on Uchfalusi froze. You can become my servant? Suspicion was evident in Lin Li's gaze. To be honest, Uchfalusi was quite attractive to Lin Li in terms of his capabilities. He was a true lich that had lived for 400 years. It let him accumulate vast knowledge and power, making him a perfect assistant to anybody. Just like Norfeller. Whether it was Jerosis or Alana, Lin Li had to do everything himself, and while this decreased the risks, it also gave him more problems. Only after the battle at the Demon Fall Valley did he get Norfeller on his side, and things became much easier from there. Sometimes, Lin Li did not even have to step in personally, all he had to do was say the word, and it would be done for him. Moreover, Norfeller was only level 17, while Uchvalusi was formerly a lich above level 20. Even if he had fallen from the legendary realm, that was only temporary since he had once surpassed the legendary realm, it would not take him long to recover his lost strength. Of course, this was all provided that Uchvalusi was not fooling him. Otherwise, wouldn't he be in trouble if he got a servant who might turn against him anytime? Alright, Uchvalusi, tell me what you're thinking. I'm interested. I can sign soul contract with you. Uchvalusi did not hesitate this time. Soul contract? Lin Li paused. He was not well versed with the various contracts undead creatures had. Thankfully, Norfeller came over from behind him and whispered in his ear. A soul contract works as follows: an undead creature breaks its soul fire into pieces and hands over a piece to the owner of the contract. Through the piece of soul fire, you can attain a portion of its knowledge and strength, as well as have complete control over it, even deciding if it lives or dies. In terms of restrictions, the soul contract is just behind the blood oath we made. So impressive? Yes. After getting Norfeller's confirmation, Lin Li smiled cunningly. Very well, Uchvalusi, I'm interested in the soul contract. Should we discuss the details? Uchvalusi glanced at this guy, and for a split second doubted if this person who was smiling like a hawker was really the one who held the scary divine power and destroyed the humorous WYRM and humorous domain. Of course, he kept it for himself. He did not dare provoke this guy. Wouldn't that be suicidal? If the guy lost his temper and let the silver flame fall, Uchvalusi would surely turn into ashes. Honestly, when Uchvalusi instantly released his soul fire, he looked so eager as though he was afraid that Lin Li would take back his words. Undead creatures were undead because they did not have a soul. Everything they had, including their power, knowledge, and memories, all came from their soul fire. As long as the soul fire was still burning, then their lives would be eternal. And right now, Uchvalusi was handing over his power, knowledge, and memories. A bit of fire started burning in Uchvalusi's skull as he chanted in a low, throaty voice. Through the cracks in the skull, Lin Li could see that the flame was burning brighter and brighter. Every flicker of the flame brought Uchvalusi great pain, and the heavy breathing and whimpers made him sound like a cornered beast. A ball of flame suddenly jumped out of his skull, followed by a shattering cry. In a split second, a strong death aura filled the room, even though the silver flame dancing on Lin Li's finger had already filled the room with a holy scent. The death aura coming from the ball of fire was as heavy as a rock, weighing down on everyone's breathing. O powerful mage, your servant Uchvalusi pledges you his loyalty. Once the soul fire had been separated, Uchvalusi's voice became very weak. Lin Li would not have heard him clearly if he had not been paying close attention. The soul fire hovered silently in the air as time seemed to stand still. Even Lin Li could not help being in shock as he faced this strange sight. He did not dare move as he stared blankly at the ball of fire. Only Lin Li knew that the phenomenon before them was not as calm as it seemed to be. The moment the ball of flame had jumped out from Uchvalusi's skull, Lin Li could already feel his mental strength boil. It felt like the flowing lava from a volcanic eruption. His mental strength was already freakishly strong, but now it had the ferocity of a starved wolf in front of fresh, bloody meat. The moment it saw the bit of flame, it seized it tightly. Then, Lin Li felt countless scenes and voices coming from the bit of flame. His mental strength had coiled tightly around it, and the countless scenes and voices also melted within, finally becoming part of Lin Li. He had completely forgotten about everything around him now, as he was immersed in this peculiar state. The world seemed to have vanished as there was only one thought left in the blank of his mind. It was to milk all the knowledge, power, and memories he could from that soul fire. Time ticked by. Nobody knew how long it had been before a loud crashing sound appeared in Lin Li's ears. It felt like he suddenly saw a bright light after walking through endless darkness, and in the bright light, Lin Li suddenly grabbed something. In a split second, he saw many vivid colors flash before his eyes as well as heard countless voices in his ears. When it all disappeared and silence returned, Lin Li knew that he was now a totally different person. Lin Li knew that the bit of soul fire did not only bring him Uchvalusi's knowledge and memories, it also gave him power in its purest form. The power had melded with his mental strength, and might have brought him past level 17. Oh no, that was not right. The difference between level 16 and level 17 was not that obvious, so it should be the peak of level 17, or maybe, he had reached level 18. Uchvalusi, I accept your loyalty. Lin Li closed his eyes as he felt the change spread throughout his body. Only when the change was sealed did he slowly open his eyes and extinguish the silver flame on his fingertip. As the remnant of the debris of the stars vanished, so did the divine power in the air, but Lin Li was not bothered by it. Uchvalusi's soul fire was burning within him, and Lin Li was able to control Uchvalusi's life and death through this soul fire. Mage Felix, we found Miss Yvonne's brother. Just then, footsteps could be heard at the door, and when Lin Li opened his eyes, he saw a few adventurers push open the door. A young man around 16 years old followed behind them. He had silky golden hair and a delicate face. From his looks, he did resemble Yvonne. Brother, is that really you? Yvonne's eyes turned misty as soon as the young man appeared in the door. After all, hadn't she suffered all the shocks and dangers along the journey just to bring her brother home? The pair of siblings had just escaped death, and had many things to tell each other after reuniting. As they talked about their experiences, their voices became teary. Unfortunately, Lin Li had been used to acting indifferent, and this emotional scene looked terribly whiny to him. Hence, he waved his hand in annoyance. All right, save this for when you're back and pack your things. We should leave this damn place first. The young lady could not help turning red after being chided by Lin Li, and wiped her tears before tugging her brother's hand to stand up, planning on waiting till all of them had left Sire Town. Who are you? How dare you speak to my sister like that? The young man pulled his hand away unexpectedly and glared at Lin Li. Paired with his disheveled blonde hair, he somewhat resembled an angry lion cub. Right, you must be an adventurer my sister hired to save me? Since when have the adventurers in Roland City become so unprofessional? How dare you speak to your employer in this manner? Let me tell you, you'd better apologize to her right now, or you'll regret this attitude when we return to Roland City. Everyone suddenly took a breath in sharply at the young man's words as they looked at him as though he had just sprouted wings. Almost everyone was wondering if this rascal really did not know better. Damn it, is he courting death? Brother, that's enough. The young lady became anxious now. Even if she was any dumber, she would realize what kind of a figure this guy who was supposedly a coward really was. He killed the humorous Wyrm and destroyed the humorous domain, as well as wiped out an entire army of undead creatures in a flash. Such a guy would be rare in the whole of Breezy Plains, much less Roland City. What scared Yvonne the most was that this guy was unusually petty. Yvonne had seen it for herself outside the bell tower earlier. He turned against his companions so easily, and heavily injured the bandit in one move. If not for Jason and Sienna's immediately repenting, he would have killed the bandit. If he did that to the people who have accompanied him along the way, what would he do to her brother? Sister, don't stop me. This guy is so rude to his employer, how can you tolerate that? Did he threaten you with something? Don't be afraid, I'll have father deal with him when we return. Shut up, I told you to stop. Yvonne was terrified, hearing her brother rattle on. The room fell silent suddenly as everyone lowered their heads and dissociated themselves from the unfolding scene, except Yvonne, who was scared out of her wits. They would be crazy to go trifle with Mage Felix now, they might get dragged into this too. The young lady stared wide-eyed at Lin Li with fear and pleading eyes. Time seemed to pass by very slowly. Yvonne did not know how much time had passed before the scary mage suddenly smiled. She then let out a long breath of relief because she clearly heard him say, Sienna, get your men to prepare to return to Roland City and try to find the bodies of those who have died. I'm sure they won't like this creepy place. Yes, Mage Felix. When the sun rose to the highest point, a dozen carriages were beginning their journey out of the ruins of Sire Town. Almost at the same time, something big happened in the Leaden Kingdom. The city of Dawn, Delano, was home to the grandest church in the whole of the Leaden Kingdom as well as Anrel, Church of Dawn, and owed it its moniker. The person helming it was none other than the Pope of the Brilliant Shrine, Rosario. Legend had it that he was the incarnation of the holy light. He became the pope at only 30 years old, and spread the gospel throughout the whole of Amril within a century. Even the stubborn magical kingdom of Felon had built a dozen churches of varying sizes. This was a great achievement that none of the previous popes had been capable of. Thus, to the followers of the brilliant shrine, Rosario was the embodiment of the holy light itself, especially in the holy kingdom of Ledon, where Rosario's words were akin to the will of the holy light. The king was nothing compared to him, as everything in the royal household of the Ledon kingdom had to be discussed with the pope before a decision could be made. Moreover, none of the kings in the Ledon kingdom found anything wrong with it, as this was the case ever since the Dark Ages ended over 1,300 years ago. If not for the protection of the brilliant shrine, the Ledon kingdom would have fallen prey to their ferocious neighbors 800 years ago already. How would they have been able to enjoy their status as one of the 4 strongest kingdoms of Amril today? The Church of Dawn was especially quiet today. There were 40 paladins, 12 cardinals, 7 head referees, and 2 archbishops present in the meeting room. They were headed by the Pope. Rosario, who looked to be about 50 years of age, and had rosy cheeks and a warm smile, was the picture of an amiable old man. On his left and right sat the 2 archbishops of the brilliant shrine. They were just beneath him in terms of authority. Lin Li was actually familiar with one of them. It was the Archbishop Unlos, who was well versed in pharmaceutics. For some reason, though, tension was high in the meeting room as everybody held their breaths and looked at Rosario silently. Their expressions of horror would have been mistaken for those of people awaiting an impending attack by the Darkness Shrine if it had been 700 years ago. Of course, nobody would think that now. The Darkness Shrine had been crippled 700 years ago, and did not have the means to challenge the Brilliant Shrine today. Now, their only association with each other was the fact that their names had contrasting meanings, darkness and brilliance. The Darkness Shrine had once been their arch-nemesis, but today, it was nothing to the Brilliant Shrine. Rosario had turned a blind eye to the friendship between Unlos and Sendros, which meant that the Brilliant Shrine did not hold the Darkness Shrine in high regard at all. The truth was that it was indeed the case. Just look at the people sitting in the meeting room. The 40 paladins and 12 cardinals were powerful individuals who were near the legendary realm. The 7 head referees and 2 archbishops had surpassed the legendary realm long ago. As for the living legend, the Pope Rosario himself, he surpassed the legendary realm at 30 years old, and never fought anybody for the century to come. Perhaps even his most trusted archbishops did not know what he was truly capable of. At a glance, there were 10 individuals who'd surpassed the legendary realm in this meeting room, so how powerful would they be? Even in the whole of Amril, perhaps only the Supreme Council could go against them. As for the Darkness Shrine, well, let the past stay in the past. Your Holiness, is what you said true? The cardinal who broke the silence was a man in his 40s. He had mustache on both sides of his mouth, the favored look of a leaden man. It seemed he was a true blue leaden. You're right, Anko. That's impossible. The cardinal's voice rose half a pitch as he stood up abruptly before realizing that everyone was looking at him. It only occurred to him then that he had been disrespectful to the Pope, and he hurried to explain himself. Your Holiness, I don't mean to doubt your words, it's just too unbelievable that the Son of the Holy Light would descend so suddenly. Have a seat, Anko, I understand what you mean. Rosario looked at the youngest cardinal without a hint of annoyance in his eyes, only a warm smile on his face. Well, it isn't just you, even I find this too unbelievable indeed. Then. Let me finish, Anko. Yes, Your Holiness. Everyone here is a devoted follower. I believe you have sensed that there was an explosion of a strong divine power southeast of the Leaden Kingdom yesterday at midnight. This morning, I went to study the Book of Dawn about what's written on the Son of the Holy Light, and it coincides with the divine power from last night, strong and pure, just like the Holy Light itself. The meeting room with dozens of people fell unusually silent. Everyone hung over his every word as they were afraid of missing out any detail. Rosario's gaze swept across all their faces before he let out a tired smile. Actually, when all of you were on your way to the Church of Dawn, I had already performed the great prophecy thrice. What? After Rosario said that, everyone including the cardinal and the 2 archbishops as well as the 7 head referees reacted even though they had remained silent so far. Unlos was the most emotional of them all. The dignified archbishop, who was also a legendary individual, suddenly stood up, worry and anxiety written all over his wrinkled face. His actions were no longer poised, and he resembled a restless young man. Your Holiness, you said that you have performed the great prophecy thrice? Unlos, you need to calm down. How can I calm down, Your Holiness? You know your own condition the best. For the past 30 years, you have been plagued by viper's poison, and not once has it ceased to corrode your body. Every time you perform a theurgy, it adds on to the danger. You must recall that the great prophecy you performed 10 years ago nearly caused the viper's poison to escape control. If not for Mr. Burnside from the Pharmacists' Guild, I dare not imagine what would have happened. Am I not fine now? Listen to me, Unlos, the viper's poison is not that scary. What happened 10 years ago was merely an accident, as I did not think that it would be able to absorb divine strength. We have nothing to worry about now, for I have found a way to curb its effects, and I believe I will be able to neutralize it completely soon. I hope that is the case, since the Pope had already said so. Unlos decided not to press further, but when he heard that it could be completely neutralized, he suddenly thought of something. Your Holiness, I know of a person who might be able to completely neutralize the viper's poison. Oh? Even the ever-poised Rosario could not help showing an expression of shock when he heard this. The viper's poison had been lurking in his body for 30 years, perhaps no one else other than the Pope himself knew the pain it brought. The poison of the wild beast had been constantly tormenting his body and soul. The seemingly never-ending pain was something hard to imagine for anyone who had not experienced it for themselves. About 2 months ago, I went to Atlanta to attend a convention held by the Pharmacists' Guild, and there I met a truly genius pharmacist. You wouldn't guess, but that a young man of barely 20 had such a great understanding of pharmaceutics that he put Balba to shame. Sandro's and my abilities absolutely paled in front of his, and we saw for ourselves that he had easily solved a daunting question that had left the entire Pharmacists' Guild helpless. There is such an outstanding young man in the Felon Kingdom? Yes, Your Holiness. Unlos took a deep breath at this moment. He is truly a genius pharmacist. Sandro's and I share the same sentiments on this. He will definitely become a pharmaceutics guru within the next 5 years. It is only a matter of time for him to come up with the antidote for the viper's poison. Oh? Surprise was evident in Rosario's gaze. It was not because he realized that the viper's poison could be neutralized, but because he'd never thought that Unlos would hold a young pharmacist in such high regard. This archbishop was the best pharmacist in the whole of Brilliant Shrine, and even the whole of the Leaden Kingdom. He was already a master in pharmaceutics, and there were barely any other pharmacists in the whole of Amril that left him in awe. Hence, to think that the best pharmacist would speak words of such high regard for a young man barely 20 years old, Rosario was really curious about this genius pharmacist Unlos spoke of. I really want to meet this young man after hearing your words. How about this, Unlos? Find out when he's free. Why don't you invite him to visit the Church of Dawn? All right. Unlos nodded. This was not a difficult thing to do, as Felix had by now most likely reached the Breezy Plains, which was the border between the 2 great human kingdoms of Felon and Leaden. It was also not far from the City of Dawn, so they would likely meet quite often in the future. Moreover, Felix owed him a favor from back in Atlanta, so it should not be too difficult to get him to pay a visit to the City of Dawn. Alright, let's set this matter aside for now. I called all of you here today because of something important. Rosario raised his hand and gestured for the Archbishop to take a seat. We must find the Son of the Holy Light as soon as we can, for he is the only incarnation of the Holy Light on earth. We must not let any harm fall on him. But, Unlos frowned. How do we know who is the Son of the Holy Light? This is why I performed the great prophecy. It will be my honor to welcome the incarnation of the Holy Light personally, and it is for this honor that I may close my eyes with a smile even if I shall be consumed by the viper's poison. Rosario smiled as his eyes were filled brimming with devotion and determination. For some reasons, however, the sun of the holy light looked unusually blurry. I performed the great prophecy thrice in order to ascertain his true identity, but for now, all I know is that he is in the breezy plains and is around 20 years old. He is also a mage. Mage? An uproar broke out in the meeting room as soon as Rosario finished speaking. Everyone from the paladins to the cardinals, as well as the head referees and archbishops, had never expected that the incarnation of the head referee would be a mage. While the brilliant shrine served the holy light, they did not refute the existence of other religions nor deities. Especially so after Rosario had taken over, he had silently acknowledged the darkness shrine, which allowed them to coexist harmoniously. That was because he believed that the holy light was magnanimous and benevolent, and any devoted follower deserved respect, no matter if they served the light or the dark. If anybody was considered a heathen in Amril, it would be the damned mages. That was right, the damned mages. They were the only ones considered heathens in Amril, as they had inherited magic and the arrogance of the high elves at the same time. They constantly preached that anyone who held enough power could be considered a deity even if they were mere mortals. Just listen to that, what heinous teachings. Additionally, the first person to say that was the one that mages hailed as the god of mages, Juresco. Yes, the one who clamored to be a god-slayer, the pompous heathen. Everyone thought they had seen a ghost upon hearing Rosario's words. The only incarnation of the holy light was a damned heathen? This is too ridiculous of a joke. The group of people stared at each other as they all had expressions of disbelief. That was all I saw in the great prophecy. As for why the holy light chose a mage as its incarnation, I do not know any better than any of you. I'm afraid we'll need more time before we can confirm the son of the holy light's identity. Rosario rose up from his chair and concluded the meeting simply. Unless reach an agreement with the Supreme Council, we need the details of all mages under the age of 20 in Breezy Plains. Anko, gather all the priests who are well-versed in astrology. We shall hold an astrological ritual in the City of Dawn in a month's time. Rodriguez, have your paladins enter the Breezy Plains. Wait, before you do that, send a heads-up to the royal family of Felon lest they mistake this as a crusade again. Yes, your holiness. The whole brilliant shrine got busy as the instructions came one by one. At this time, on the other side of the Breezy Plains, a group of adventurers had entered the perimeter of Roland City. Mage Felic, Roland City is just ahead. The head of the adventurers, Sienna, was sitting next to Lin Li in the carriage. To be honest, he did not wish to share a ride with this fellow, it was pure torture. Sienna felt as though he was a mouse tied to a cat the entire journey, and he could lose his life to this sadistic cat at any time. Unfortunately, Lin Li left him with no other choice. Well, the carriage was spacious enough, but there were already Norfeller and Edgefalusi, the two undead creatures, inside, making him feel uneasy. The other two carriages were occupied by Jason and his companions as well as the twins from the Castellans family. No matter how Lin Li thought about it, he could only share Sienna's carriage. We're finally here, after the exhausting 2-day journey, and having the boring Sienna as a companion, Lin Li was way past being annoyed. When they finally reached Roland City, Lin Li immediately jumped out of the carriage, yawning. Lin Li was not the only one excited at the prospects of reaching the city. He had only just gotten out of his seat when he saw the twins of the Castellans family jumping out as soon as their carriage came to a stop. Good morning to the both of you. Good morning, Mage Felic. So it's this unprofessional fellow again. The young master had just alighted before he looked up into the sky as he refused to look at Lin Li, only scoffing at him. We're entering the city soon. Just you wait, I'll have father deal with you. Cinder, can you please shut up? Yvonne clenched her fists as she stood at the side. She silently swore to teach this mouthy fellow a lesson once they got home. She had no idea what was with this fellow, he had not once stopped ranting throughout the journey. Yeah, he enjoyed running his mouth off, but Yvonne had not been able to catch a single wink as a result. This is going to sound bad, but after the trip to Sire Town, I realized your men are really bad, and are not capable of dealing with any real danger at all. If you really ask for great wealth from the castellan, then you're not far from a crisis yourself, because you're unable to fend off those who will covet your wealth. It is a mercenary world in the breezy plains, and you only command respect if you are strong and powerful. Take Jason for example. It would not be too much to say that he can live happily in Dulin City even if he doesn't have a penny on him, and why is that? That's because he has the capability, with his companions. They are one of the most outstanding group of adventurers in the whole Dulin City, and nobody would dare belittle them, not even the castellan of Dulin City himself. Don't you want to enjoy the same status as Jason, Leader Sienna? I think I understand what you mean, Mage Felix. Sienna froze for a minute before he slowly raised his head and looked at Lin Li with sincerity. Thank you for your advice. Haha, that is no advice, merely a suggestion. As for what you should do, it is ultimately up to you to decide. Lin Li seemed to have forgotten about this whole issue after he said that, and never mentioned it again. Of course, Lin Li could do that, but Sienna dared not. The young mage's words hit close to his heart. Before this, he had indeed decided to ask for great wealth or some kind of authority, but he had never thought of how he would be able to defend what he would receive. This was the breezy plains, after all, and if Arother's father, the previous castellan, could die in his own house for some reason, how did he know he would not meet the same fate? Lin Li looked at Sienna, who seemed to be deep in thought, and smiled satisfactorily. He had already shown him the path, now, it was up to his fate to finish it. This was only a few words to him, after all. Even if Sienna chose not to follow this path, it would do Lin Li no harm, but if he did, and managed to build a strong mercenary corps, he would be of great help in the future. There were many things the Guild of Magic could not intervene personally in, hence, nearly every Guild of Magic would maintain good relations with a mercenary corps. The Guild of Magic in Gerosis did so, and so the one in Alana. They had to be on good terms with a mercenary corps, the friendlier, the better. Lin Li knew Sienna and his men well. Unfortunately, they were terrible in terms of ability, and would not be able to fend for themselves, much less complete tasks for him. Lin Li thought about it, and decided to give this opportunity to them as there was not really anything he wanted besides the food. Whatever he wanted, the castellan could not give him, and whatever the castellan could produce, Lin Li had no interest in. Why not give this chance to Sienna as a casual favor, giving him a chance to become powerful while also getting in his good books? Then, if Lin Li had any favors to ask of Sienna in the future, could the latter refuse him? This was a win-win situation, especially to Sienna. It was a godsend for him. After getting Lin Li's approval, Sienna was grinning from ear to ear, and was in a terribly good mood the whole afternoon, giving everybody he met a suspiciously warm smile. Lin Li could not continue watching him like this, so he coughed dryly after lunch, and said, "Hey, Leader Sienna, is there something you should be doing now?" "Oh, right. After hearing Lin Li's words, the smiley Sienna suddenly came to his senses, and hurriedly changed his clothes before calling for a carriage and heading off to the castellan mansion with the twins. Lin Li felt bored after Sienna left as there were only that many people in their base, and all of them were so afraid of him that they could not speak more than a few words to Lin Li before stuttering. Anybody would have thought that Lin Li had done something to them. The only person who dared speak to him was Jason, who was acting strangely too, annoying Lin Li greatly. After pacing around the base, he decided to call for Norfeller and Edgefalusi. "If the both of you have nothing better to do, then go out for a walk with me." "Okay, what could a couple of undead creatures be doing?" "Whatever you say." This was how Lin Li led a high-ranking vampire and a lich as well as someone he called to act as a guide from the base, and started their walk down the streets of Roland City. The streets looked nothing too different from the ones in Dulin City. They were full of buildings left from the Dark Ages and full of the aura of the High Elves. Even the districts were similar. There was the Adventurers Guild about 200 meters south of the base, and many adventurers frequented the building. The street facing the door of the Adventurers Guild had shops lined on both sides of it, some selling weapons, some selling armors, and some selling magical items, while others sold poisons and concealed weapons. Anyway, as long as it was something an adventurer might find some use for, it could be found in the streets. Gilded Rose? Lin Li saw a familiar name as they turned a corner, and could not help finding it amusing. Isara's business was doing well indeed. Even Roland City, which was far away in the breezy plains, had fallen prey to the man's family's business. You have good taste, Mage Felix, Lin Li had called the adventurer who was the least afraid of him out of the whole mercenary corps to be his guide. This fellow was called Barav, and was a level 10 bandit. Strangely, he looked nothing like a bandit should, and was helpfully pointing out things to Lin Li along the way like a tour guide. Now that they were standing outside the Gilded Rose, Barav's chatter had been taken up a notch. The Gilded Rose is the best magical equipment shop in the whole Roland City, and while their prices are a little high, you can be sure they sell only good stuff. Would you like to take a look, Mage Felix? Don't worry about the prices. Sienna knows their boss, so if you see anything you like, just mention Sienna's name, and you'll be sure to receive the best deal. Lin Li brushed his nose, too embarrassed to tell Barav that he actually knew the boss of the Gilded Rose quite well too. He did not have to look around the Gilded Rose, as he knew very well that they kept the best things they had in Gerosis. Lin Li was one of their biggest customers too. Right, Barav, are there any other places in Roland City that sell magical equipment? Well, that's difficult to say, Barav hesitated. Depends on your luck. Oh? You see, Mage Felix, somewhere not far ahead there is a consignment bank that has been around for centuries. Many adventurers who are short on cash like to put their things up for sale there, and it became a small marketplace after some time. If an adventurer wanted to, they could also sell their things to the consignment bank and have them sell it for them. Lin Li brushed his nose. Wasn't this the place they said you would be guaranteed to earn a profit at as long as you had good taste, a pawnshop? Let's go take a look. Lin Li had never seen anything like a pawnshop after being in Anril for so long, and he could not help his excitement, dragging 2 undead creatures and a bandit along with him as they rushed to the shop. The place Barav mentioned was not too far indeed. After they rounded a couple of streets, they saw a low-rise building situated at the corner of a street. A busy junction was at the door of the building, and passers-by often glanced in the direction of the shop. Lin Li could see marble steps and 2 open doors from where he stood. Many adventurers went through that door. Some of them looked quite strong, at least from what Lin Li could tell. They were around level 15, and while not nearly as strong as Jason, they were rare talents amongst normal adventurers. The group only stepped in when a man in his 40s welcomed them warmly. Good evening, distinguished guests. Anything I can do for you? Let me introduce myself. I am Brooke, one of the people in charge here at the Time Consignment Store. You guys are adventurers, right? If you're looking to increase your powers, you're in the right place. We sell all kinds of weapons, armors, and magical equipment here at the Time Consignment Store. We don't need the magical equipment for now, but my friend here is lacking a weapon. Lin Li pointed at Norfeller who stood next to him. I wonder if Mr. Brooke has anything to recommend. Weapons? Of course I do. Brooke's smile widened comically as he led the group in while rattling on. We had a new shipment of weapons these few days. I'm sure you've heard of the Marathon's Forging Workshop? These weapons are masterpieces from them. Should I bring you to take a look? Marathon Forging Workshop? Lin Li stopped when he heard this, and his expression darkened. Mr. Brooke, you're kidding me, right? The weapons from them might be good enough for city guards, but it will be a disgrace for my friend. They can cut open magical beasts, but are they good enough to shield him against magical attacks? Well, the middle-aged man could not help being embarrassed after Lin Li's remark, and realized he met people who knew their stuff. The Marathon Forging Workshop was well known throughout the Felon Kingdom, but not many knew that the best of their weapons were for the 3 great armies, and they usually sold inferior goods to others. While they were not merely good enough for city guards like Lin Li had said, they were definitely not enough for an adventurer above level 10. However, the middle-aged man was experienced, and while he knew he had been exposed, he did not panic, and merely smiled apologetically with a bit of sheepishness, intending to let this matter rest. Seeing as he had smiled an apology, Lin Li decided not to pursue the matter, and was waiting for him to explain himself when he heard a sarcastic voice from behind. The heck, which bastard dares to be so arrogant? Even the Marathon Forging Workshop's weapons are only good enough for city guards? I wonder what is good enough for you. Why don't you enlighten me? Lin Li froze for about 10 seconds as he found this situation amusing and ridiculous. He had been in Amril for about a year, and had made many enemies, but not once had he encountered somebody who spoke so haughtily without reason. No, he had. Lin Li turned around and realized he was wrong. There was a young man around 20 standing behind him, short and fat, but he just had to wear a glittery silver armor too. His helmet was in his right hand, so he looked like a big disco ball carrying a small disco ball from afar. Bloody hell, so it's you, idiot. Lin Li did not have the chance to speak before Lazarick had started shouting away. Alright, no wonder I could not find you in Dulan City. You're hiding away in Roland City now, aren't you? Why, you realized how powerful I am that you know to hide first, huh? I'll tell you what, there's no use hiding, you people over there, catch this bastard now. Lazarick shouted away at the top of his voice, but he secretly took a few steps back. Unfortunately, his followers were not dumb either. They had clearly heard Master Garza say that the black-cloaked fellow was a level 17. What a joke, you want us to die? Why don't you go ahead instead? Damn it, never mind, I'll let you go this time. Lazarick had been shouting away, but none of his followers made a move. Even a fool would have realized that something was not right, hence, he could only yell away while taking back what he said about catching him. Shut up, Lin Li gave him a glance and could not be bothered to deal with the glittery disco ball any longer. He laughed and turned back to Brooke, apologizing, I'm sorry we were interrupted by that fool. Well, Mr. Brooke, any other recommendations for my friend? Situated southwest of the breezy plains, Roland City, also known as the City of Abundance, enjoyed a widespread reputation for having fertile land and hundreds of farms. The crops produced here far exceeded what was needed by the whole breezy plains. Every autumn, long lines of carriages would line up outside Roland City to barter for crops. They hailed from many smaller human kingdoms nearby. Even the elves and dwarfs, the two big races, would secretly dispatch middlemen to obtain supplies. As the carriages with food left the city, large amounts of wealth and other resources flowed endlessly into the City of Abundance. Ever since the Dark Ages ended 1,300 years ago, perhaps nobody knew exactly how much wealth the City of Abundance had accumulated. Arather ascended the position of Castellan at the age of 24, and it had now been over 20 years since that moment. With his intelligence, Arather had managed the City of Abundance in a highly organized manner in the last 20 years, which was seen as a nearly impossible feat to many. When he took over as Castellan, the City of Abundance was trapped in chaos. When the previous Castellan, the old Arather, had passed on, his men were scrambling for power, and the City of Abundance was as good as scattered sand. Powerful forces around the city were also eyeing this fertile piece of land like hungry beasts. Almost everyone was waiting to see Arather become a laughingstock. The Castellans of nearby cities were even betting with each other to see if he could last a month as Castellan. Perhaps nobody had known that not only would he last more than a month, he would do so spectacularly. After becoming the Castellan, the first thing Arather did was to open the city's doors and welcome a powerful elven army which had dealt with the chaos in Roland City within 10 days. Not only that, for the next 20 years, they served as a powerful deterrence for any nearby forces who threatened to make a move. Nobody knew where the elven army came from, and nobody knew how Arather was able to control them. Anyway, Arather had managed to secure his position as Castellan, thanks to this army, even though everybody had thought he would fail. For the next 2 decades, he also held the power over the City of Abundance tightly in his hands. All of this was something Sienna had told Lin Li along the way. The over dozen carriages entered the city easily, and headed straight to the base of the mercenary corps. Only then did Lin Li realize that Sienna's mercenary corps had been established barely 2 weeks ago, and did not even have a proper name, much less a proper base. They only had a few houses in the southwestern district of Roland City. The most spacious one was turned into a meeting room, also doubling as a waiting room, while the other 2 on the side were turned into living quarters. Of course, it was guaranteed to be crowded, one would be lucky to be allocated a room with only 4 to 5 people, and even the leader Sienna had to live with others. However, Sienna was sure that it would not be long before they found an escape to this. This was because when they entered the place, Sienna clearly heard the young mage tell him, "Sienna, if you're free this afternoon, find some time to send the twins back to the castle and mansion. Remember, do this in the name of your mercenary corps. You can decide what to ask for as a reward, but remember to get me 1 million gold coins worth of food. I need to use it to exchange for something else." When he heard this, Sienna's first reaction was, "Am I hearing things? How was that possible?" As a person from Roland City, how could Sienna not know what Castellan Arathar's rewards meant? They meant that it didn't matter what you wanted, be it money or authority, anything you want, Arathar could satisfy you. Sienna could not believe that anybody in the world would give up such a great opportunity. It was something everybody dreamed of, nobody in their right mind would reject it. However, Sienna had clearly heard the young mage say that he would give him this chance, only asking for 1 million gold coins worth of food. That was no big deal to Sienna, he did save the Castellan's son. Roland City was also known as the City of Abundance, and was well known for producing ample crops. 1 million gold coins worth of food would merely fill up 1,000 carriages, equaling about a year's produce of a dozen farms. There were hundreds of such farms everywhere in Roland City. When Sienna heard what Lin Li said, he was dazed and had a blank look on his face as though he had been possessed, yet he was strangely excited at the same time. He felt as though he was a beggar who got a windfall and was worried about losing his wealth while racking his brains over how he should spend it. "Actually, I have a suggestion. I wonder if you would like to hear it." "Huh?" The sound scared Sienna. When he raised his head to see who had been speaking to him, he sheepishly nodded when he realized it was the person who had given him the fortune. "If you have any instructions for me, Mage Felix, of course I will listen to it." No, this is not any instruction for you, merely a suggestion. Actually, I think you should not ask for any monetary rewards. While funds are important for adventurers, and can help you build up your mercenary corps, it is merely a single important factor, and does not determine your success as a mercenary corps. If you can, ask for special privileges, maybe the privilege to hire adventurers from retired veterans, or having the armies help in completing missions. You could also have the Castellans send army instructors to help train your subordinates. Anyway, you're going to want to build up the ability of your mercenary corps. Sienna listened quietly as Lin Li spoke, and did not hurry to flatter Lin Li as he usually did. Now, Brooke was not as direct as before. Brooke worked at the time consignment store for over 20 years. Throughout the years, he rose from a minor receptionist to one of the major executive committee members. Having met many kinds of customers, he knew that the young mage before him was not to be trifled with. Furthermore, Brooke did not have the guts to challenge him either. Other people might not know who that sparkly melon was, but definitely not Brooke. That man was one of the VIPs of the time consignment store, young Master Lazarick. From the conversation between them, it was obvious that Lazarick was really reserved when he interacted with that young mage. Hence, how could Brooke belittle that mage? He would not want to lose his future by offending Lin Li. Brooke hesitated for quite a while. Indeed, we have a batch of good magical equipment. However, their prices are much higher as well. If you are keen to see them, I can bring you to take a look. Brooke said. I hope Mr. Brooke will not disappoint me this time, Lin Li replied as he nodded. He called Norfeller and the others, and followed Brooke along the long walkway. After reaching the 3rd floor, Brooke stopped in front of a tightly locked door. He fished out a bunch of keys from his pocket and opened the door. What came into the view of everybody was a huge showroom with all kinds of weapons and armor on display. Some of the weapons were emitting vigorous magical waves. Lin Li found at least 10 sets of magical equipment with just a casual glance. Please follow me, Brooke said. While he led the people through columns of shelves, he described the features of the different weapons patiently. Look at this double-edged sword. It was made from real thunderbolt adamantine. If its user summons the force of thunder when he uses it, he will be able to break through any magical shield. A firm and tough skin of a beast would be like a thin sheet of paper when it comes into contact with this sword. Lin Li tried to imagine Norfeller with the double-edged sword. He could not help but feel awkward at that thought of it. Mr. Brooke, do you have other recommendations? What about this? Brooke responded promptly by directing Lin Li's attention to a machete beside him. Have you heard of Doolin's Guild of Blacksmiths? Yeah. Lin Li smiled, not saying more. He'd definitely heard of Doolin's Guild of Blacksmiths. In fact, he even nearly had Norfeller get rid of their president. This machete was created by Doolin's Guild of Blacksmiths. Being the brainchild of over 10 high-ranking blacksmiths, it even involved the consultation with a real smithing master, Mr. Garza, in some vital areas. Despite its black color and unappealing appearance, it was made from the most valuable abyss fiendish iron. Once it tears the skin of the enemy, the power of the curse will infiltrate their body at once. Under the corrosion of the curse, the ability of a sword sage would have been greatly affected. At this, Brooke paused. Then, he took the machete before Lin Li. There's this mageweth here too. Bloodlust? Lin Li recognized the mageweth on the machete immediately. The striations on the weapons were all in the color of blood. From how the 27 striae were entangled like a menacing monster, it had to be a high-ranking mageweth by the name of Bloodlust. Mr. Mage has a sharp eye indeed. Brooke flattered Lin Li with a thumbs up. Hee hee. The Bloodlust mageweth did not have a complicated construction. With such an obvious characteristic, not to mention a guru like Lin Li, any low-level inscriber would recognize that mageweth easily. Hence, Lin Li only smiled, and did not take Brooke's compliment to heart. But, Lin Li indeed had some interest in that machete. It was not common to find weapons made of the abyss fiendish iron. Those sold in the markets would easily cost up to 10 or 20,000 gold coins. On top of that, the Bloodlust mageweth was definitely suitable for Norfeller. Among the high-ranking mageweths, the principle behind the Bloodlust mageweth had to be the most evil. Although it did not have much of a special feature during normal use, if it were to come into contact with blood, its desire for blood would be activated. It would seek to absorb the blood of its enemies and convert it into the purest force, turning the user of the weapon into a bloodthirsty beast. To a guru inscriber, it was not hard to summon the Bloodlust mageweth. In fact, Lin Li had already mastered the skills to create the Bloodlust mageweth many years ago. Yet, he did not have the chance to create it. The evil nature within the Bloodlust mageweth required the warm fresh blood of humans. This meant that in order to create the Bloodlust mageweth, 1 to 2 humans had to be sacrificed for it. A hypocrite like Lin Li certainly would not want to do such a thing. I'm not bored enough to kill people just for a darn mageweth. He would rather do less of such ill-natured deeds. Yet, if someone really wanted to do it for him, he would definitely accept the offer. It was like the situation now. Since someone had already created the Bloodlust mageweth for him to purchase it with his own money, both parties would stand to benefit. Mr. Mage, I know you have great knowledge of these things. Since you know the difference between the abyss fiendish iron and the Bloodlust mageweth, I'm not going to say anything further. Yeah. Lin Li nodded. At the same time, he was trying to predict the price of such a good weapon. Just when Lin Li was still thinking if he should bargain with Brooke, he felt a thin sense of cold air coming from the corner of the wall. Being a man with sensitive mental strength, Lin Li could absolutely catch it without a mistake. It was normal for the different magical equipment placed in the showroom to emit magical waves. However, that feeling the chill gave off was too familiar. In fact, he had felt it in the ruins of Sire Town. That was the purest death aura ever. Mr. Mage, I will just sell it to you at the lowest price, 40,000 gold coins. Wait, Lin Li stopped Brooke. He did not catch the price Brooke offered the weapon for. His attention was all diverted to that death aura. He pushed the machete away and made his way towards the corner of the room. I knew it, Lin Li exclaimed upon seeing a pair of daggers leaning against the wall. They were covered in a thick layer of grey dust, and he could not tell what they were made of. If one did not look properly, he might not spot them, but there was something the mage was certain of. That chilly death aura had to be emitted by the pair of daggers. When Lin Li held on to them, he could sense a familiar wave of death energy flowing within. Although it was not very strong, it was extremely pure. Lin Li had seen a similar force in Sire Town, when they were having a battle with the army of undead soldiers. Similarly, when he was at the ruins of Sire Town, he felt it when the humorous Wyrm came down from the sky. However, even if it was the legendary Lich, Uchfalusi, none of them carried a death aura as pure as this. Mr. Mage, seeing that Lin Li did not reply when he disclosed the figure, Brooke actually thought it was due to the huge cost of the weapon. When he was silently regretting, that young mage asked, "How much do these 2 daggers cost?" "Huh?" Brooke gasped in shock. His gaze towards Lin Li was filled with perplexity. Was that young mage kidding? How would he be interested in these 2 pieces of scrap leaning against the wall when he showed no interest in weapons created by the marathon smithy? "I was asking about the cost of these 2 daggers. Lin Li had to repeat his question. This time, Brooke finally heard the question clearly. Yet, that didn't mean that he formed the answer to it. For a long period of time, he was looking at Lin Li with a weird expression. Lin Li did not know if he should laugh or cry. When he was about to repeat his question, the door of the showroom was pushed open. Bloody hell! The man who entered resembled a silvery winter melon. Apart from the usual followers, Lin Li could spot an unfamiliar young man behind the melon too. He looked younger than 30, and was very handsome. His appearance was great, but his slightly thin lips and small eyes made Lin Li not very comfortable. Especially when his eyes were closed, Lin Li felt as though he was stared at by a snake. "Sir Lazarick, what brings you here?" Brooke greeted Lazarick promptly upon his arrival. "I'm just here for a walk, and to meet the person who had no interest in weapons created by the marathon smithy," Lazarick replied, and glared at Lin Li challengingly. Lin Li looked at the 2 people in the distance, quietly. He could not help but feel suspicious at how familiar they looked. "So, Brooke, do you not welcome us?" Lazarick asked menacingly after he brought his men into the showroom. He stared at Lin Li challengingly before looking at Brooke. "Hee, Sir Lazarick, why you really like to tell jokes." Brooke's smile froze. A blind man would have been able to sense that there had to be a deep grudge between Lazarick and that young mage. Now that the former brought a group of men into the showroom without warning, he had to be seeking trouble. In fact, Brooke was not really welcoming of Lazarick now. He was in the middle of a highly promising transaction. Now that Lazarick barged in so recklessly, he knew that the deal had to be put off. Unfortunately, he did not have the guts to show any hostility. Lazarick was the son of the Castellan of Duland. If he were to offend him, he might be unable to stay in the breezy plains anymore. At this moment, Brooke could only squeeze all the smiles on his face. "You are a really rare guest. How would I not welcome you?" "That's more like it," Lazarick said as he nodded in satisfaction. He and the young man walked to one of the shelves and started discussing the different weapons. Then, their gazes landed on the pair of daggers in Lin Li's hands. This time, Brooke really misunderstood him. Lazarick had no intentions to create any trouble. He knew that Lin Li was not an easy opponent. That young mage might still be alright to deal with, but the attendant beside him might not. Garza told him clearly in the carriage the other day that the fella donned in black robe was at least level 17. Lazarick knew he wouldn't be a match for him. Since he was not in Duland, and he only had the usual attendants who could only bully normal people, it meant death if their opponents were above level 15. Although Lazarick was not a bright man, he was not that dumb. He knew he could not seek death like this. Actually, if he did not chance upon a friend on his way back, he would have left the time consignment store. While they chatted, Lazarick talked about what had happened previously, and couldn't help but feel angrier. Then, he reasoned out that he should not leave the matter as it was. Honestly, the way Lazarick liked to vent his anger was excusably cute. "Didn't you want to buy weapons and armor? Weren't you uninterested in those manufactured by the marathon smithy? Good, I'm going to beat you with my wealth. Brooke, how much does this pair of daggers cost?" "Huh?" Brooke was pleasantly surprised. The pair of daggers had been placed in the showroom for at least a century. Nobody had inquired about them at all. What made the two men interested in this weapon? Could it be that all the assessors of the weaponry in the shop failed to see its value before this? I'm asking you a question. What, do you not think I can pay for it? And no. Sir Lazarick, please don't misunderstand me. I didn't mean it. I wanted to tell you that this mage beside me had already showed interest in this pair of daggers. You might want to look at other weapons instead. I say, Brooke. Did you turn stupid? Why can't two customers be interested in the same thing in your shop? Why are you hesitating? 15,000 gold coins. 15,000 gold coins? Damn, that's cheap, Lazarick commented as he reached for his pocket. He took out a crystal card and placed it on the table. There's 50,000 gold coins inside, and I'm buying both daggers. After Lazarick entered the showroom, Lin Li had been standing there quietly. He only smiled when Lazarick took out his crystal card. I say, Lazarick, you are not playing by the rules, are you? Phew, what broken rules? Since the time consignment store is open for business, my money is the rules. If you are unhappy, use your own money to set the rules yourself. You're right, Lin Li nodded. He did not say anything more. Lin Li fished out his crystal card and said, Mr. Brooke, I'm not sure how much money I have in there, you can check it out yourself. I'm buying that pair of daggers. Oh, all right, Brooke replied nervously. But, the moment he received the crystal card, he drew a cold breath. Oh my God. Then, Brooke's eyes were wide opened. GG Glitter Gold Trade Union. Yup, I think it is, Lin Li replied as he rubbed his nose awkwardly. He felt a little ashamed. If he had not extravagantly spent the money he earned from the auction of the arcane magic potion at Gerosis, he could have formed a hill of gold coins. Now that much of the hill had been used up on random purchases he had made during his journey from Gerosis to Alana, he realized that he did not have much left in the crystal card Jirian had given him. Hence, he had no choice but to use Hoffman's crystal card just to buy a pair of daggers. While Lin Li was still feeling the great sense of embarrassment, Brooke had almost peed his pants in fear. Crystal cards distributed by the Glitter Gold Trade Union were always guaranteed by the currency in Felon Kingdom. Anyone with a good background would prepare a card for himself. If the Glitter Gold Trade Union were to crash overnight, 2/3 of Felon would have to declare bankrupt too. It was a fact that the crystal card from the Glitter Gold Trade Union was used almost universally, and had integrated into the lives of everyone. But, Brooke knew that the card in his hand was absolutely different. Brooke would bet his life that the VIP card he was holding had to be given out personally by that decision-maker of the Glitter Gold Trade Union. It was not something he would see frequently. In fact, he had only seen the card twice throughout the 20 years he had been working for the time consignment store. The first time was 10 years ago, when Brooke had just been raised to assist his boss in the transactions. There was a big shot from the capital of Alana who showed his boss a similar card. Brooke could still remember very clearly the expression of his boss. It was definitely more exaggerated than his now. After that, his boss told him that anyone who owned that card had the ability to withdraw any amount of money from any glitter gold bank. It meant that he had the wealth equivalent of the entire nation. If he wanted, he could purchase the entire time consignment store too. The second time he saw the card was now. Brooke would never have dreamt that he would see that type of card again. His teeth chattered in fright as he stood in a daze. Brooke, why are you standing there for? Do I have to get Uncle William here? Lazarick asked impatiently. Brooke's voice trembled as he replied, Sir Lazarick, this is the VIP card of the Glitter Gold Trade Union. Darn it, what VIP card are you talking about? When Lazarick was prepared to scold him, he was stopped by someone. Then, he realized that it was that young man beside him. The man whispered something into his ear, and when Lazarick raised his head again, his face was full of shock. The VIP card is so powerful? Lazarick asked the young man again after he looked at Lin Li from the distance. Yeah. The young man nodded firmly, and did not say more. What the F***ck? Laserek cursed as he put away his crystal card. Then, there was nothing more to be said. Brooke did the transaction for Lin Li without any further obstructions. The pair of daggers cost 15,000 gold coins, and he did not dare to charge him even a bit more. He would not dare to do anything funny to a customer who had the VIP card of the Glitter Gold Trade Union. After getting the daggers, Lin Li looked around the showroom again. Unfortunately, nothing worthy caught his eye. Seeing that it was dinner time soon, he bid Brooke goodbye, and decided to return to the mercenary station. But, before leaving, he glanced at Laserek again. Oh, yes. Sir Laserek, you are definitely right. Only people with money can set the rules. You watch out, bastard. Laserek said through gritted teeth, and glared at Lin Li's back. After returning to the base of the mercenary corps, Lin Li saw Sienna engaged in a discussion with a group of people, and did not want to disturb him. Hence, he went back to his room and called Norfeller and Ujfalusi over. Ujfalusi, what do you think of this pair of daggers? Upon entering the room, Lin Li placed the daggers on top of the table. Ujfalusi picked one of them up. After sizing it for a while, he placed it back carefully. Master, if I'm not wrong, this pair of daggers should have belonged to a powerful undead creature. Tell me more about it, Lin Li responded earnestly. It was a wise decision to ask Ujfalusi to assess the daggers. Being a lich previously, that guy had lived a few hundred of years. Having a wisdom that was beyond any other human being, he could certainly give a satisfactory explanation for an object filled with death aura. I'm not sure if you had heard of an assassin by the name of Haller active in the Breezy Plains 200 years ago? Haller? Do you mean the person who killed the sword sage, Ulysses? Lin Li asked as he frowned. He had heard that during the final stage of the Dark Ages around 1,200 years ago, when the High Elves dynasty fell, mankind was trying to rebuild their homes in this piece of land. After the war, Enril was not as harmonious as today. The rest of the High Elves was desperate in trying out various methods to use their remaining strength to create upheavals. It was Ulysses who camped at the borders of Felon Kingdom. Being one of the 3 sword sages of Felon Kingdom, he and his warriors were regarded as the most powerful force in the kingdom. No one had expected him to die 3 days after he arrived in the Breezy Plains. It was Haller who killed him in his own military camp. Ulysses' death led to chaos in the whole Felon Kingdom. The royals of the kingdom were enraged, and 3 groups of imperial guards were sent after Haller. In the next decade, almost all the people, even ants, were interrogated. Yet, it was as though Haller had evaporated into thin air. Although 1,200 years passed, the whereabouts of Haller after that incident remained a mystery. Yeah, it was that Haller, Ujfalusi nodded, and pulled a chair to sit before Lin Li, but, I presume not many people know that Haller was an undead creature. Undead creature? Yup. To be exact, Haller was a true high-ranking vampire who surpassed level 20 at that time. Hence, he did not need to play dirty tricks to defeat Ulysses. The weapon Haller used back then was this pair of daggers. The lich paused. Actually, the reason why I became a lich was related to Haller too, Ujfalusi muttered. Since Ujfalusi did not talk about how he became a lich due to Haller, Lin Li did not insist on knowing the reason. Also, it did not matter to him if Ujfalusi was an evil lich or not. Knowing that everybody had their own secrets, he understood the need to respect Ujfalusi's privacy as well. He knew very well that Ujfalusi would naturally tell him his story in the future if he wanted to. So, Lin Li only smiled. It seems like this pair of daggers indeed suits Norfeller. Yes, master. There was this rumor that the pair of daggers was given Haller by the immortal king. The massive death energy in it allowed Haller's ability to reach the peak of the legendary realm. Ujfalusi said. Then, he suddenly shook his head. Unfortunately, the daggers you have in your hands are incomplete. They lack the most important energy source. There were supposed to be 2 cursed gems etched into their handles. Only cursed gems have unlimited death energy necessary to bring the best out of the daggers. Cursed gems? Lin Li exclaimed smilingly. He opened the ring of endless storm and fished out something shiny. My god, Uchfalusi was stupefied by that shiny object. Although he had lived as a lich for 600 years, he did not expect there to be such a large gem of curse in this world. With it being as big as a fist, Uchfalusi could not imagine how much death energy could be stored within the gem. But, he was confident that if he owned such a big gem of curse, he would have the ability to turn everybody in the breezy plains into undead creatures after their death. But, I think it is very troublesome to cut the gem of curse into smaller pieces. I have to do some research, Lin Li said as he scratched his head. Then, he pushed the daggers before Norfeller. Norfeller, you can take these daggers first. I will help you put the gems in them when I find the method to cut them. Yes, master. After putting the gem of curse into the ring of endless storm, Lin Li was still thinking if he should ask about the immortal king. Then, he heard someone knocking on his door. Mage Felix, are you inside? Sienna, what brings you here? Lin Li asked as he got up to open the door. It's like this, Mage Felix. Castellan Arather wants to hold a feast to thank the mercenary corps. He is inviting every member in the team, so I'm wondering if you are free too. Dinner? Lin Li paused, and took some time to think over it. It is too boring to stay here. Since I'm free tonight, why don't I go and take a look at the Castellan mansion? I should be free at night. You can let me know the time we set off. That's great, I will let my men prepare the carriage. There were many luxurious carriages parked outside the Castellan's mansion, and the guests who came in those vehicles had donned gorgeous outfits. Anyone would be able to tell that they were big shots with noble background and status. That night, the mansion guards were really busy. They had no time to rest since the afternoon, and were busy with nodding their heads and bowing to all the guests. The guests that visited tonight were not limited to the nobles in the capital of Alana. There was also Lazaric, son of Dulan's Castellan, as well as William, the legendary figure of Dulan City, a well-known collector and appraiser who lived a modest life as the owner of the time consignment store. However, the arrival of several guests confused the guards. Although those 3 men and 1 woman seemed to keep a low profile, the Castellan, Arather, actually went to welcome them in person. When the Castellan of Dulan visited them a few years ago, he did not even enjoy such a grand welcome. Could they be the secret envoys sent by His Highness? One of the guards asked the others. Although the guests had already gone into the mansion, the guards still could not get over it. Mage Felix, we're here. Sienna's voice could be heard after the carriage stopped outside the Castellan's mansion. Sure, responded Lin Li. He did not forget to neaten the long robe he was wearing. With the unhappy experience back at the mansion of the Gerosis Castellan, he wore a tailored rune robe made from the gilded rose. With its delicate craftsmanship, it looked very smart on Lin Li, just as though he was really a nobleman. Behind Lin Li was Norfeller. The high-ranking vampire was Lin Li's only attendant tonight. He had no other choice but to leave Uchfalusi at home. That dude was a set of bones that emitted heavy death energy. Although it was usually covered by his long black robe, if anything were to go wrong at the gathering, people were bound to be scared to death. According to Uchfalusi, the pair of daggers was named Heaven's Wrath. They emitted a faint sense of death energy under Norfeller's black cape. Lin Li let Norfeller test the powers of the Heaven's Wrath when they got in the coach. To his surprise, the daggers were simply too powerful. Norfeller did not have to use any force to break Lin Li's water shield. It was lucky that Norfeller withdrew the daggers quickly, or else Lin Li would be in real danger. Of course, Lin Li did not forget that the Heaven's Wrath daggers were still incomplete. According to Uchfalusi's, he still had to embed 2 cursed gems in the Heaven's Wrath to demonstrate its true powers. Even Lin Li was curious to know how freakish the Heaven's Wrath actually was. It seemed like he had to find an opportunity to chat with Anduin soon. The skill of the crystal sculptor who helped to cut the crystal of eternity was rather proficient. If he could get his help again, there should be ways to cut the gem. While Lin Li was still calculating, Sienna was flashing the invitation card to the guards. The guards looked at the card, and then at the people in the coach. Then, their gaze went back to Sienna. Are they really the Castellan's guests? They had no choice but to suspect them, the carriage was too run down. The hair of the horse was not well trimmed, and they could not spot any decorations on the coach. It was pitch black as though it had just run through some mud. They reasoned that coach to be the cheapest one sold on the market. It would surely not cost more than 50 gold coins for one to get both the coach and the horse. Please wait outside for a moment while I check with the people inside. The guard was very careful. The guests today were all big shots. One could easily be the boss of some trade union. If these people before him had ill intentions towards other guests, it would be too much for them to take responsibility for. Luckily, it did not take too long. The guard was out with someone after 2 or 3 minutes. Captain Sienna, you are the star of this party. How can you be so late? You'll have to drink more later. That someone was a middle-aged man around 40. The clothes and accessories he was wearing were not very luxurious, but gave people a simple and harmonious impression. His actions carried a special charisma of a middle-aged man. Greetings, Lord Castellan. Sienna stepped forward hurriedly. He knelt down on one knee, and bowed before the middle-aged man. Captain Sienna, you are too formal. You are the benefactor of my family. Not to mention that you saved Cinder from the Sire bandits, you also brought my dear Yvonne back safely. I haven't even thanked you properly yet. The middle-aged man helped Sienna up, and looked at the people standing behind him. Come, come. Captain Sienna, introduce these people under you to me, please. Although the entire mercenary team was invited, how could Sienna bring everyone here? Apart from himself, there were only Jason and his team, as well as Lin Li and his attendant. Of course, Sienna did not have any people under him here. Lord Castellan, they are not my attendants. Sienna denied hurriedly. Is he joking? I would be dead if I called anyone here my attendant. This is Mr. Jason from Doolan City. Jason? Arother gasped. Doolan's Jason, the young adventurer who led his team and brought back the beheaded leader of the Blood Bandits? A rare guest indeed. I have always wanted to meet this capable adventurer of Doolan who had never failed any of his missions. I can't believe that Captain Sienna actually brought you here today. I have to give you a toast later. Hee, Lord Castellan is too kind, Jason replied calmly. Being known for his achievements at such a young age, Jason had encountered many similar situations. He was not flattered by Arother's friendliness, and instead introduced the 2 teammates of his. Oh, yes. Captain Sienna, who are these 2 gentlemen? This is Mage Felix, and this is attendant, Mr. Norfeller. You are a mage at such a young age? That's really impressive. Hee, you flatter me. Come to think of it, my 2 children at home have always been pestering me to get them a magic mentor. But, all the matters at hand always make me postpone their request. If you are free, can you help by giving them some advice on magic? That'd be my honor, Lord Castellan. Lin Li laughed as he brushed the matter off. A fool would have known that the Castellan was only trying to be polite towards Lin Li. The Castellan was not as ingratiating as compared to how he acted towards Jason. He had to think that Lin Li had much less worth. In terms of coaching his children in magic. Why would the Castellan let the heirs of Roland City be mentored by a random mage? With Castellan's politeness, the atmosphere was unusually harmonious. The group found themselves in the grand hall very quickly. After leading them in, Arother excused himself apologetically before going off to greet other guests. I didn't expect such a formal gathering. Sienna exclaimed in excitement. He had been looking around eagerly after he sat down. Oh God, even Mr. William is here, he gasped after seeing the man streaming in with the other guests. Mr. William? Lin Li repeated that name. It sounded very familiar to him. Just when he wanted to ask Sienna who he was, Lin Li suddenly felt something amiss with Norfeller, who was beside him. What happened to you, Norfeller? Norfeller had been with Lin Li ever since they came out of the Demon Fall Valley. How could he not be close enough to notice the change in Norfeller's mood? Furthermore, although he was sitting in his seat obediently, Lin Li could sense an ominous feeling from Norfeller. he seemed possessed from his grave disposition as well. Norfeller appeared not to hear Lin Li's question. His hand tightly gripped the heaven's wrath underneath his black cape, and his pair of red eyes was deadly fixed on something in front of him. Lin Li followed the direction of Norfeller's gaze, and saw 4 people seated in the distance ahead. 3 of them wore long white robes, and were emitting a strong sense of holy aura, which Lin Li had encountered when he was with Archbishop Los. From that, Lin Li could tell that they had to be the followers of the brilliant shrine, and that their positions should be higher than normal priests, such as a bishop's. As for the last person, Lin Li could not decipher her background. She was a young lady in her 20s. Despite being in the splendidly decorated hall, her long golden hair stood out like the dazzling sun. Her complexion was as smooth as jade, and the silver armor on her body complemented her appearance very much. Like the legendary seraph, she was incredibly attractive. Even a cold-blooded fellow like Lin Li could not help but find his eyes glued to that beauty, but the weirdest thing was her aura. Although she emitted a strong holy aura, it was completely different from her companions. When she stood up from the chair, she was like a sharp sword that just got unsheathed. Her intrusive holy aura was like a heavy chain that could cause suffocation. Shit, this is bad. Lin Li had a bad premonition. It was no joke. When Lin Li was at Alana, he stayed with the Archbishop of the Brilliant Shrine in Los for a period of time. He was clearer than any other people about how much the believers of the Brilliant Shrine despised undead creatures. They forever had the intention to slay any undead as long as they spotted one. Smells like trouble is brewing. Lin Li could really feel a strong headache. He saw the 3 men and 1 woman stand up, and their gazes were all on Norfeller. Lin Li was incredibly clear that their gazes were filled with hatred and disdain. It absolutely was not any special method of socializing. At the same time, Norfeller's red eyes were fixed on the 4 people too, murderous and foreboding. Underlying his heavy breathing were growls, just as though he was a helpless beast that had been forced to the edge of death. Calm down, Norfeller. In order to ensure that the gathering proceeded normally, Lin Li tried to pat Norfeller's shoulders. Lin Li's attempt to comfort Norfeller managed to hold him back a little, but Norfeller's body was still stiff, and his hands were still gripping the heaven's wrath. Then, he saw the 4 people walking towards them. God damn it, why did they really walk here? Lin Li's heart skipped a beat. He stood up from his chair, smilingly, and blocked Norfeller with his body, casually. The pyroblast spell was completed very quickly. He was ready to cast it on anyone if they were to confront Norfeller violently. As for whom the pyroblast would harm or what it would destroy, Lin Li was not concerned at all. After he readied himself with the pyroblast, the 4 people with divine occupation had gotten in front of them too. Darn undead creature. How dare you show yourself at Castellan Arathor's banquet? Do you think you can escape being purified by the holy light? A cold but clear voice left the scarlet lips of the sexy female paladin. That was supposed to be a beautiful scene, but Lin Li did not have the time to appreciate it. The only thing he felt was headache. A true headache. Shit, these devotees were really risking their lives. While Lin Li was cussing internally, he was all smiles on his face. Hello there, I'm wondering if there is any misunderstanding? Yucks. Who knew that his face full of friendly smiles would be faced with a face filled with disgust? It belonged to that pretty female paladin. It was as though she was not interacting with a living human, but dirty trash fished out from the drain. As a human being, are you not ashamed to align yourself with undead creatures? Lin Li was not enraged by how harshly those people scolded him. He rubbed his chin casually and smiled at them. What's wrong with that? The surroundings became quiet at once. The female paladin stood there in shock, not knowing how to react. Being one of the strongest believers of the Brilliant Shrine, she had slaughtered countless undead creatures in the 20+ years of her life. She had also encountered many necromancers who wallowed in degeneration. But it was her first time seeing such a prideful necromancer, who portrayed himself as a righteous man. How could there be such a person in this world? Why you. At that moment, the gaze of the female paladin became very uncertain. What are you trying to say? Lin Li asked as he rubbed his nose. He moved a step forward to close the distance between him and the sexy paladin. He then lowered his voice teasingly as he asked, I heard that this pretty lady wants to purify us? That's right. The female paladin stuttered as she took a step back subconsciously. Although she was a true follower of the brilliant shrine, she could not help but be intimidated when that stranger closed up on her. Is that so? Then that's great. But, I'm unsure of a thing. Can this beautiful lady enlighten us about the theurgy of the brilliant shrine? I'm so curious to know if it's really powerful enough to purify any high-ranking undead creature without alarming anyone around them. Lin Li took a pause before he shamelessly continued. I'm dying to know how many innocent lives would the righteous and holy theurgy implicate when you are purifying me and my friend. Would it be 1 life, or 2? I think that's too little, isn't it? Since there are at least 100 people at this banquet, it will be lucky if half of them can survive that righteous and holy theurgy. I wonder how lucky would Castellan Arather be? If his luck is bad, it is going to be troublesome. As Lin Li finished his speech, the other 3 priests looked at their surroundings uneasily. All of the guests were immersed in joyous exchanges. Glasses of wine were clinked politely, and no one had noticed the tension brewing between the light and the dark in that corner. When they turned back to look at Lin Li, their gazes were all filled with hesitation. Then, a senior-looking priest spoke something to the ear of the female paladin in a low voice. Before she left, the female paladin told Lin Li angrily, you won't be laughing for long. Phew. After seeing the 4 people return to their seats, Lin Li took a long deep sigh in relief. Eek, that was close. Brave fronts were not to be put on recklessly. The 3 priests could easily have the ability of archbishops. If a battle were to break out, they should be no weaker than archmages of around level 17 or level 18. On top of that, with a paladin whose ability he could not decipher, Lin Li did not have the confidence to match them even though his ability was at the peak of level 17. Furthermore, the brilliant shrine was an outpost in the Felon Kingdom, hence, they had many believers living in Roland City. If they were to know that he was on good terms with the undead, what mattered was not all the gossip, but the possibility of him losing his food worth 1,000,000 gold coins. Lin Li could only gamble. He still remembered what Lin Li said to him when he was in Alana. He said that the devotees of the Holy Light would not leave anyone at his peril, or harm the innocent due to their own interest. At that moment, Lin Li could have only bet that they were indeed firm believers. It was a lucky and wise decision. Otherwise, the banquet would really be turned upside down. Yet, the fact that there was no trouble now did not mean that there would not be issues happening later. In fact, Lin Li could expect those fellas to find trouble with him after the banquet. Hence, while they were seated, Lin Li was already devising ways to overcome the potential threat. He indeed had 0 chance against a group of 3 level 17 or level 18 priests and a paladin. But, if he could launch a sneak attack against one of them, the rest would be less threatening. Now that Norfeller had the Heaven's Wrath with him, he was definitely stronger than he'd been in the ruins of Sire Town. To Lin Li, the easiest target to launch a sneak attack had to be that sexy female paladin. As compared to the 3 other wily old foxes, the little girl should be the most innocent one, and thus the most likely to step into his trap. Lin Li had neither morals nor tenderness toward women. Chivalry, compassion, and righteousness were traits that were definitely missing in his dictionary. However, what trap should I set? It might be too obvious if I try to lure the tiger away from its lair. If they are not tricked by me, I will be exposing myself. Should I just use poison? I still have half of the manticore's tail in my ring of endless storm. Time passed very quickly. When that fellow was still harboring ill intentions, the banquet officially started. The first person who raised his cup to everyone was the Castellan of Roland, Arather. A toast to all of my distinguished guests. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.